The president of Iran is dead. Frances Martel is here, Breitbart World Editor. Frances, how are you?
Doing great. The president of Iran is dead.
Yeah, that's, I think, good news. Aren't we supposed to, Frances, when someone passes away, no matter how wicked they are, we're supposed to say nice things about them?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do not subscribe to that because, first and foremost, death is a reunion with God, right? We mourn because we selfishly are going to miss those people when they're gone, but death for the person who dies is just a transcending. It's not something necessarily sad. For Raisi, it is, because he's going to go meet his judgment day. But he hurt a lot of people. He killed thousands of people. His legacy is one of the darkest of our modern statesmen, for lack of a better word. So I don't think anyone has to feel any obligation to treat his legacy like anything other than it is.
That was beautifully deep and perfect. Okay, so who is this cat? And I guess my biggest question is, does it really matter for Iran, or is it really the supreme leader who's calling the shots and we just get some other monster to take over?
It's the latter. So the supreme leader is the supreme leader. Khomeini calls all the shots. Raisi and the president in general is just the face of the mood, essentially, that Khomeini wants to show the world at any given time. So before Raisi, there was a allegedly moderate president, during the Obama era. There was this attempt to make Iran look like the more rational Middle Eastern actor, calm, and that ended with Raisi. Raisi won the rigged election because Khomeini wanted to take an aggressive stance. He wanted Iran to be a threat and to be very transparently a threat to Israel, a threat to the United States. And so I think all it's going to represent is maybe a shift in the diplomatic attitude, unless he's replaced by someone that has the same sort of legacy of butchery. But that's, I don't think it's going to change the actual foreign policy of Iran or domestic policy, but, it might change the facade.
You said rigged election. I would like to distance myself from that. We are not supposed to talk about rigged elections, Frances.
In Iran.
Dominion voting machines of whatever the Dominion of Iran is. You are going to get sued.
Khomeini handpicks the people on the ballot. It's not like there's a process to get on the ballot. Like the supreme leader says whether you can get on it or not. So it's a different level. I'm not impugning the voting machines. Just the type of system that Iran uses.
That's great. Yeah, let it be clear, the voting machines are totally legit in Iran. It's before that the problem is. All right, so who, I guess, does it even matter talking about, like, who's going to take over? Maybe the question is, I guess there were 9 other crew and or other officials on board. Do we know anything about those people? Are any of those, like, a loss militarily or something of significance?
Well, yeah, the foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, I think I pronounced that right, he was on there, too, and he, just like Raisi, he was kind of the face of this new aggressive foreign policy. His predecessor, Javad Zarif, was an older gentleman who spoke in low tones, tried to come off rational. And Zarif was actually, at the end of his career, he got in trouble for criticizing Qasem Soleimani, the guy that Trump took out, who was the head terrorist. So that's very different from Amir Abdullahian, who was very aggressively anti-American, anti-Israeli, kind of when we talk about the Chinese, we use the phrase wolf warrior, which is, essentially rude diplomacy. This was Iran's version of that. So we lost, the face of Iranian foreign policy in addition to the president. And then a regional governor was also on board. And I think those were the big names.
Okay. What do we know about the crash itself? Anything noteworthy there?
Well, everything we know comes from the Iranian government, so take it with a grain of salt. Okay. But he was coming back from Azerbaijan. He was actually in I think it's eastern Azerbaijan. It's the province in Iran he was in. Very mountainous area, foggy, and it was a helicopter. So, the comparison I've heard is it was kind of a Kobe Bryant situation where, mountainous, well, not the mountainous region part, but the fog, the bad weather, and you have a helicopter that is not the most reliable form of transportation. And it seems like we don't know the details of it, but apparently they lost control, and that's terrain where, there's no such thing as a hard landing. Iran called it a hard landing for a while. But you can't do a hard landing in steep mountainous terrain. That's a crash.
Yeah.
So Iran is not accusing anyone, as far as I can tell, of any foul play. They are treating it as an accident, so we kind of have to wait and see how that develops.
Are you kind of surprised that they would admit to that and not turn it into some PR win in some way?
I am too. And it's really hard not to get the conspiracy brain going. Of did Iran kill Raisi? There's no evidence of that, for the record. But the second I saw yesterday that a helicopter crashed, my first thought, I'm sure a lot of people's first thought was, did the Israelis do it? But Iran is not saying that. No one is accusing anyone of any foul play here. So if there was foul play, it was whoever chose to fly a helicopter in that weather at that point, from what we know. But we also know so little that it's really hard to give you anything concrete.
That is odd to not try to use like admit the weakness that a helicopter crash might show to the world, and not spin it into some PR win in some way. That is a bit odd. But alas. Okay, does this mean anything good for the people of Iran?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. It does in a spiritual way. If you're a spiritual person, like I said at the beginning of the segment, of course, anyone like that meaning justice is good. But for the reality of the situation on the ground, I don't think so. The only glimmer of hope is that Raisi was uniquely violent and uniquely brutal. Before he was president, he presided over the execution of between 5,000 and 30,000 dissidents. There aren't that many guys like that in Iran. So whoever replaces him might be slightly less brutal. And his legacy, by the way, is the Mahsa Amini situation. There was a girl in 2022, Mahsa Amini, who was beaten to death because her hijab was slightly wrong. And that triggered widespread protests in Iran, and Raisi responded by killing an unknown number of students, probably in the hundreds, if not thousands. That kind of repression, again, it takes a singular kind of personality to be that repressive. I don't think there's someone in Iran that can fill those shoes quite like that. But obviously, the day-to-day situation in Iran is, the regime controls that, and not even Ayatollah Khomeini dying is going to change that much.
Oh, really? Okay, that was going to be my next question, is what do we need to know about the supreme leader? Because this guy looks old. And when he dies, do the people of Iran have a chance?
They do have a chance, but it's a very small window. And what we've seen in other countries like this that have regimes of decades is that if that small window, if there isn't a very organized effort to seize power with a leadership structure, with weapons, then all you get is these sporadic protests. And no matter how big they are, there's still unarmed civilians protesting. And those people are killed, disappeared, imprisoned. And then you get a continuation of the regime. We saw that in Cuba, obviously, with Fidel Castro. We saw that in China with Tiananmen Square, right? Basically, if there's no organized resistance with leadership, with weapons, it's really hard to take out a regime that is that deeply entrenched.
What a shame. Which might be a good segue to the Congo, but let's just give one last second. Is there anything else that we need to know about Iran? Anything noteworthy? Anything that the lamestream's not talking about that we should be aware of?
Well, at this point, the question is, how are the people of Iran going to respond? That's another big question I have. Are there going to be protests? Are people going to celebrate? I've seen a lot of sort of social media chatter that people in Iran are sharing like celebratory memes that Raisi is dead. So that's how popular he is. And I'm very worried about a crackdown, especially with Iranian youth that are some of the boldest protesters and dissidents in the world. I'm really worried for them. I really hope it doesn't go badly, but we have to wait and see just how they're going to react.